Hello all, and welcome back to 90.3 WMSC Upper Montclair. My name is Kyle Pepitone, joined with
Nate Williams.
And today we are joined with two special guests, Jim Roach and Dan Avidan from the band Shadow Academy and many other projects, but we will get to that later. Starting off with the big thing, the reason why you are here, you both play a substantial amount of roles within Shadow Academy. Can you tell us about what each of you do?
Yes, absolutely. Dan, you want to start?
Sure. I mean, it's a pretty easy breakdown. Jim would come up with most of the music, and then I would just sort of take it, and he would send me lots of little bits, and whatever jumped out at me as something that kind of flowed well, I would come up with vocal melodies and harmonies and lyrics for, and we just kind of ping pong it back and forth. A lot of the album was written during COVID, so it was sort of like a remote back and forth process.
Right.
Yeah. A lot of the ideas that I would kind of just, a testament to Dan's melody writing is ideas that I thought were throwaways, and then he'd go like send something back that was kind of like amazing, and then I'd kind of build a world around it and then send it back, and then he'd finish the vocals and stuff. So it's very much just the two of us for the most part. We can get to the other guys later, but yeah, just we both wrote it. I did the music, and Dan did all the vocals, and ended up just kind of being something way more special than we thought it was going to be.
Nice. And Jim, I know you used to be a producer. What influenced you to go from producing to the more instrumental and performing side of things?
Yeah, so I still just mainly produce records. That's my day job. But this was just something I used to be in, bands, and I've always made my own music. So this was just basically something that I'd been wanting to do for a long time and didn't really know how that was going to happen. And then it just happened to work really well with Dan. And then it was like, oh, this is exactly what I've been trying to do for years. So but yeah, I'm actually, we're down working on a different project that I'm producing with these guys right now. So
nice.
Got my foot on each side of the line, I guess. So
right, very cool.
For the writing process for the album, you mentioned that a lot of lyrics were Dan. For Shadow Academy, you mentioned a lot of the lyrics are based on books, very obvious, especially in songs like White Whale and Once and Nevermore. Can you talk about the process of projecting and relating the themes of these books to your life in the world?
Yeah, sure. I mean, a lot of I've been in comedy bands for a very long time, comedy projects, I should say. And COVID was a weirdly heavy time, as obviously for everyone. And it was a quiet time. There's a lot of space that wasn't there in our normal lives for things like reading, and things just felt kind of serious in a way that like they hadn't before. So I just spent a lot of time hanging out at my house, reading different books and getting inspired. Because a lot of times when you're writing music, it's about the things that are going on in your life, But during that time, there was almost nothing going on in our lives. We weren't going anywhere. We weren't doing anything. So the adventures of life were sort of mental through these books. And that's where a lot of it came from. And each one is its own story, but there were a lot, like you said, Moby Dick, The Last Unicorn for those two songs, and then Three Musketeers, Picture of Dorian Gray. Like there were a lot of different ones that it made approaching each song a much different experience, because those books are also completely different.
For you, Jim, were the lyrics and the relations to literature something you had in mind when creating the music?
No, not at all. That was what was so fun about it, is I was coming at the music from just a completely different world. And then when Dan started sending songs back with the lyrics and the vocals, I was like, oh, that's cool. What's that about? And he's like, then he told me, like, I'm just reading all these classics and I'm going to try to shape the record around that. And I was like, wow, what a cool idea. But it never, in a positive way, I never went out of my way to like, make it sound like books on tape or anything. No, it never influenced the music, but I think that's what made it so cool at the end of the day.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Nate.
Oh, you're good. And I was going to say, incidentally, it's amazing how it just happened to come to be, because the album itself is very cinematic, and even though it's a bunch of different tales, it's the way that it's produced sort of makes an anthology, with Jim's producing and Dan your voice. It's a very storybook like album.
That's cool of you to say.
Yeah.
And it is true, because even though books are the inspiration for them, none of those songs are about the plots of the books. Like anytime you read something, if you read a book when you're 20 and then you read it again when you're 40, it's a completely different book, because you sort of like co-author these stories while you read them based on your perspective and how you see the world. So even though we could say like, yeah, it's the lyrics are based on literature, it's really about us, and using that as a vehicle.
Right.
Which is the best part.
Yeah.
And the going off this whole literature thing, this is something I didn't realize going into the album firsthand. It was only through like extra research and re-listening to the songs that I made those connections. And you've also mentioned, Dan, that you don't love explicitly saying what the lyrics are about so people can glean their own interpretations from. But there's this other band that I listen to called Ice Nine Kills, and their last 3 albums have been homages to books and horror movies. And although it's the same rough theme of the based on literature / movies, it's amazing how the 2 albums are so sonically and lyrically different from each other.
That's cool. What's the name of the band again?
Ice Nine Kills.
Ice Nine Kills. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, they're a very heavy band that I've just been listening to, and it's actually, I like to consider it my legacy, because now everybody at the radio station listens to it because of me. So
very cool. Yeah.
Nice.
I mean, Mastodon had that album Leviathan, which is a whole Moby Dick concept album.
right.
So
Forgot about that one.
This has been going on for a while.
Yeah. And I do want to jump into a little bit because we mentioned previously that you both work on many other projects together. Not only do you have Shadow Academy, but Dan, you have NSP and Sky Hill, Game Grumps, of course. Jim, you have producing for those projects, and also your own comedy band, Go Banana Go. How do you do all of it?
Yeah.
Great
Honestly,
question.
tell us your secrets.
It couldn't have all happened at once is the easiest way to say it. I was in bands for a while since I was 19 or 20, and then Sky Hill was the first of those that you mentioned to come along, and it didn't succeed at first. And we called it quits for a little while, just because we couldn't get it going. And then I was fortunate enough to meet Brian, who's been my comedy partner for going on 15 years now. And so when we got NSP rolling, and then Game Grumps was able to help that along, because that fan base found the other projects that we were involved in, then it sort of like became easier to get into other projects, because those first ones sort of had an engine that was just sort of going. Starting up projects is a very big lift. And so it sort of has to happen sequentially, where you get something going, and then once that can sort of be on cruise control, then you can start to figure out where other projects can fit in with your life.
Right.
Otherwise, your brain will collapse.
Yeah, it's for me, this has just been my workflow for 15, 18 years now, is, getting one project done, moving on to the next. And because so much of my time now is just spent in this camp with these guys, and we know how each other work, we kind of know now instinctively what to do, whether it's Ninja Sex Party or Starbomb or, the Sky Hill stuff I'm way less involved in, but it's with Dan and I know how we work. So we get to kind of get things done and kind of get to the crux of recording much quicker. I always tell people, like, producing is like 10% music and 90% psychology and being a therapist. And so when you know the people really well, you've cut out a lot of the work, in terms of figuring out what brings out the best in them and stuff. So we kind of really push through projects pretty quickly and have them be high quality because we know each other so well. And that's, at least in relation to the work I do with these guys, that's like massively helpful to the process.
Right.
So that now when I go and work with new people, I'm like, this is harder, you know?
Right.
So you just never know what you're going to get, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
And with all that, how do you guys differentiate the styles and genres of each project? They're vastly different, especially considering Go Banana Go and NSP in relation to Shadow Academy.
You know, they come from different parts of you, you know, I think sometimes online it's easy to just think like someone is one thing, you know, because they have their quote unquote brand or whatever, but everyone has their silly side, everyone has their serious side, and the different projects kind of scratch different itches, if that makes sense. And Shadow Academy, and part of the reason Sky Hill came back, I don't know if you know that, but we're working on a new album.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Yeah, like a lot of the reason those projects came back was because we had been doing comedy things for so long, or I'd been doing comedy things for so long. I just felt like there's this, I don't know, a non-pretentious sounding way to say that, but like there was a part of me that wasn't getting expressed, you know? And when you feel that building up, you just sort of like get like antsy a little bit. So it was less a question of like, how do I make all these work? And more just like, well, when I sit down to write music, this is what's going to come out because this is what's in there right now. So you just sort of kind of be honest with yourself about where you are and what you feel like producing.
Yeah, I was going to reiterate what Dan said, is like, you know, nobody's one dimensional. And like, I'm a huge comedy nerd and I love that stuff. But there's also a side of me that loves really cinematic, dark, cool music, and that's just as big. And so to be able to kind of do both things, like, and do these silly kid songs with Brian, is a huge itch for me. It's super fun. And then doing NSP stuff, obviously, that's a huge itch, and it's so fun and so challenging. But then if I was to be stranded on a desert island, all I would write is the Shadow Academy style stuff, really. I mean, that's just what that's the kind of bands I was in, you know, and that's where my heart lies musically. And so that's always fun. It's just great to have outlets, you know, to be able to do all different kinds of stuff with incredibly talented people, because that's not always the case, you know. So
yeah.
I respect both of you.
Yeah. You're pretty talented.
Yeah, you too. Sorry, please continue.
No, I totally understand. In one of your live streams, though, you mentioned that this album would have gotten it done a lot sooner had it been for the state of the world. How long on average would you say it takes you to complete a project of this caliber?
Good question.
Yeah. Everyone's its own story, you know. With Shadow Academy and Sky Hill, I think they were destined to be long projects just because of the nature of the emotions you have to tap into, you know. And like I don't really know how to say it better than that. Although there is a way, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, I can say right now, I don't think if we had decided to do that project and there wasn't, like, the world wasn't coming to an end, I don't think it would have been as good. Not because the world was coming to an end, but because there was just an open-ended time. There was no like stop date. There wasn't like, hey, we need to get this. It was very just like, it was sheerly, we didn't even know if we were going to release it. We just did it because we loved it, and we were sending other ideas, and it was like, we didn't know what it was. And so I think I worked more on that record, I think, than any record I've ever done, mainly because it was such a passion project. I mean, I think I have in my hard drive 33 different versions of Once and Nevermore.
That's amazing.
Like, I mixed it 33 times, and then I would tear it down and do it again until it was just right. So I was really freaking OCD about making this record exactly how I wanted it to sound. And I do that with all the records, but it's just, it's more of a baby to me. And so I spent, you know, an inordinate amount of time making it how I wanted it to be. And same with Dan, with like the melodies and the lyrics. I mean, there was no like, we just got to get this done. It was like, let's just make it right. So, and it'll probably be the same on the next one.
Yeah, and comedy is a much more kind of immediate flow. It flows out of you. It's lighter. It's more fun. I mean, we take our stupidity pretty seriously too, you know, but it is like we're working on a Starbomb album right now, and we've been writing and recording as we go, and it came together pretty fast. Part of that is because, you know, we've got Brian and Aaron on board, so it's two other really talented minds, but also just because of the nature of the immediacy of the goofiness of the songs, you know. You become a little less precious about it. So yeah, each one is completely its own story, but thank goodness, because you only get so many years in your life, you know, and like if every album took 3 years to write, you wouldn't get to do too many of them.
The other thing too is comedy is always best when it first happens, almost exclusively. Like most of the funniest things we've ever gotten from Brian or Dan on NSP, it's like it happened and we all laughed, and it's like we've tried to recreate it and you can't ever get it back. And so that kind of makes things move quicker, because you're like, all right, well, that's done. And you know, and it is harder to write comedic music for obvious reasons. But the spark, like I feel like the spark with a band like Shadow Academy is like a slow burn to a fire, and comedy's like the inverse. It's like a blaze of fire, and if you spend too long with it, it just dies, and then the song is like not funny anymore. So if we spent 2 years, well, we kind of did spend 2 years on making this last record, but like the new NSP record, but all of the brilliant things that happened were captured in an instant. And so in that sense, you know, it goes fast, but logistically it was just a longer record to make this time. But
like you guys were saying before, you know, when it comes to comedy and things like that, and how it's a bit easier to write than something like Shadow Academy. Even so, in that same way, you have to think about the lyrics, like songs that are for comedy purposes and from so long ago, like If We Were Gay, for example, from NSP, like that song, at least to me, still holds up. And even in the middle of the comedy, has like pretty good message just of like, you know, happiness. And when you get to Shadow Academy, especially because it's based on things that you guys are feeling, and you can feel that in the music, it's not just about the story. You can really see how, especially without the time constraints, you can see just how special that project became. And I want to ask a bit of a two-sided question. How long do you think someone or an artist or group should spend on a project, or do you think it is better and you are in a space to make better quality stuff without that time constraint like you guys have?
What a great question.
that's a great question. Yeah.
You have an answer?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's what I do for a living.
Go for it. I don't have an answer.
The record should take as long as it should take. And that's a weak answer. But if you really pull it apart, it's like I've made records with bands that we cut live and that needed to be captured in 4 minutes. And that's how that band needed to be recorded. And then I've had bands where the record took, you know, 2 years, 3 years to write and record, and that's what that needed. So you never want to put a time limit on it. You just need to go at the pace that the music kind of dictates. And if the music dictates a feel that's fast and it feels right, which somebody needs to decide, which can be hard if you're the artist, because you never really know. So you need to find somebody you can trust. But then that's how long you need to spend. It might be a weekend. But if you're somebody that's still figuring out the sound of a record and you're still working on the songs, and that's just how long it's going to take. You know, it's every single record and every artist is going to be different. And you kind of just got to let the music tell you when it's done. It sounds very hippy dippy, but it's true.
No, I understand completely.
Yeah, and like this is a weird thing to say out loud, but it really is how I feel and has been the experience my whole life. It doesn't feel like we write these songs. You know, it feels like they're just out there floating around, and somehow we put ourselves in a mood to catch them and like create them. And it's a weird thing to say out loud, because if there's a follow-up question like, what are you talking about? I don't know. I don't know how to answer it, but that is how it feels. And there was a comedian named Mitch Hedberg, who was one of my all-time favorites. And he had this really bizarre way of making jokes, and no one could kind of, a lot of people would ask, how do you write these jokes? And he would say the same thing. You know, he's like, I just sit down in a hotel with like a Coca-Cola or an orange, and you just put yourself in like a meditative state where the jokes, you can just see the jokes floating around, and then you grab them. So it's not sitting down to write jokes, it's putting yourself in a place where you can catch jokes more easily. And it sounds weird, but the best songs I've ever been a part of have always just been there, and we just kind of channel them, for lack of a better term. The ones where we're like, okay, this idea can work, and we just got to grind it out. They suck. They always suck.
Fail.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I don't know why. And they take forever, and they're never as good. It's very strange.
We were just in the studio last week here, and we talked about this because I had sat down at the piano and I just started playing. Like I said, I never said like I'm gonna play this chord, but my hands started going, and I was like, oh, that's really cool. And it was simple, super simple. And I was like, Dan, check this out. And he's like, oh, yeah. And I was like, yeah, I don't know where that came from. Like, it just kind of happened. And I don't think I believed that for many years. And the older the longer I've done it, it really is. You just kind of get yourself in a zone where, you just let things kind of hit you. And then you go, wow, that wasn't me, but that's awesome.
There was
No,
not to make this a 5,000 hour answer.
You're fine.
Cool. I'm rereading Lord of the Rings for the 12th time, and I saw an interview with Tolkien. He was a professor, and he said he was grading papers, and because they asked him how he came up with the idea for the whole thing, and he said, one of my students' papers that got handed in had a blank piece of paper in it, and I was about to mark him down for it, and instead of writing like "see me" or whatever, he just wrote, "In a hole in the ground lived a hobbit," and just out of nowhere it just happened, and he wrote it. And the entire Lord of the Rings series came from that one moment of whatever it was and wherever it came from. So who knows how any of this stuff works.
I understand completely. Don't worry. Like everything you were saying, even with the follow-up question, like in saying I don't know, like personally, I feel that me and Kyle ourselves, we worked on a music. We were under a time constraint. We worked on a musical for our station. We had only 2 weeks to do it. But even in that same sense, like you were saying, Jim, when you sort of just wrote, like sat down at the piano, like we kind of just were riffing, and then we're just like, here it is. So I understand completely, and it's an ethereal experience. So I'm glad that that's a relatable experience to the two of us.
That's
Absolutely.
Cool. Very cool.
And I'm glad you brought that up, Nate, because this flows into the next question. One of the head of that project, the musical, also put out a documentary. So we had cameras going the whole time during those 2 weeks. But you've mentioned in either your release day live stream or the one when you just put out White Whale, that you didn't have many cameras in the studio because you felt it changed the vibe or the flow of the room. Can you elaborate more on that?
Sure. People act differently in front of cameras. When you're on camera, you want to look good, and you're thinking about your appearance and how you're coming across, and none of that has anything to do with the sound painting you're creating, and that really was what it came down to. We're we're fortunate enough because Game Grumps and NSP have the fan bases that they do. We're fortunate enough to know that if we work on something, there'll be someone out there who checks it out, and listens to it. But I completely understand how for a totally new project where you need that social media aspect of things, it can be very important to make sure you have that visual side of things as well. But for us, with the music we were making, which was so personal and so from the heart, and also just from me personally, like at this point in my life, I don't need any more attention, like that. I've had more than enough. So the camera eye felt, I don't know what the word would be, oppressive, like distracting in a way, that just didn't let me concentrate on what we were supposed to be doing.
And did that philosophy, for lack of a better word, come from Game Grumps, or was that something before? Because I know the reason the Game Grumps don't use a webcam is because you want it to just be taught. You don't want to be acting for the camera.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It's a different kind of performance. And there's so many people who do it really well, like Markiplier, Jacksepticeye, like those guys are buds of us. I have no idea how they do that. Like that is so much more exhausting to me, and I don't think Aaron and I would have been able to do the show for, it'll be 10 years in June that we've been doing it together. I could have never done it that long if I was worrying about how I looked, in addition to just, relaxing into the funniness and the fun of it,
Right. Because there is there are very two different types of comedy. There is visual comedy, and there is the more audio based words, something like that. I don't know what it's called, but verbal comedy. And you and Aaron have that dynamic where you don't need the visual comedy to everything you say works as verbal jokes, and it's perfect for what the show is, because you can visually focus on the game and verbally focus on the two of you.
I'm really glad you feel that way. Thanks, man.
Of course.
But yeah, cameras are distracting. If there's an artist I'm working with and they bring people in to film it, I try to just be like, can we not do that? Because it just kind of wastes the day, in my opinion, because you're not really there to like be working. You're there to like capture things that are for other purposes. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just, I hate being in front of cameras. Like I hate photos taken of me. I have a hard time being on your webcam right now. I'm just kidding. So for me, we always, how many times Brian and I or you just like, hey, we should bring a videographer down on this trip. And then everyone just goes, totally. And then like nobody does anything about it, because I think ultimately it's just too much. Like, I don't know. We have way more fun just, without that. And that to change the dynamic would be a travesty. So
yeah, there was I can't remember who said it, but there was someone who said people used to want 15 minutes of fame, and the way things are going societally, they'll eventually just want 15 minutes of privacy.
Yeah.
And I get it.
This is 90.3 WMSC Upper Montclair. If you're just listening or just tuning in, my name is Kyle Pepitone, and along with Nate Williams, we are sitting down with Jim Roach and Dan Avidan of the band Shadow Academy.
So college radio, where we're both from, and the reason for this interview. There's obviously a lot of different methods of finding and listening to music. And especially since, we're on websites and on iHeartRadio, but we're also on the FM dial where radio, a lot of people find it. With the rise and convenience of streaming services, why do you believe something like college radio is so important to both listeners and artists alike?
Great question.
It really is.
I think culturally it's important because I feel like it's a training and a breeding ground for people to get into. My wife works at iHeartRadio and has for years, and we have a lot of friends that are, you know, program directors at iHeart, and I love them dearly, but I also am like, it's kind of like politicians that start off wanting to change the world and then they become president and they're trapped by politics. I feel like dear friends who are program directors at these big companies, there's no spirit there anymore, you know? And so I feel like what college radio gives is the ability to move sideways and backwards and forwards and expose things that aren't really dependent on ad budgets and how many ears are tuning in and things like that. So I think culturally it's important to reach people with whatever you want to be saying or doing, because the rest of the world has major governors on what they're getting to hear. So I did, you know, college radio when I was in college, and it was a great creative time for me because you just got to play around with music that you like, but also like doing silly stuff. And it's, I don't know, I think it's important to create creative people, and to also be able to like let the world hear things that no one else is going to be able to hear. So
Yeah, that's totally it. Like there's so much good music out there that never gets heard. And most radio will play the same 20 to 50 songs over and over and
Yeah.
over. And you know, I grew up in Jersey as well, and sorry, not to talk about another radio station, but like
You're all good.
well, WSOU, Seton Hall's radio station, they would play very heavy stuff.
Yeah.
And when I was 13 or 14, I would click past that part of the dial and just be like, oh my God, what is this? You know, it was so cool and so different. And they would play album tracks of bands that, you know, were popular, but not different songs, you know, which now perhaps that's less of a big deal where you can just click on a song on Spotify. But in the days of when you have to buy an album to hear another song by an artist, it was a big deal to hear what else was there. And so just that kind of amount of discovery and exposure to new things is really, really important. And college radio is amazing for that.
Yeah, especially with our library that we have over 13,000 songs that we play. And we also have things like WMSC Unplugged, where we have people come in, local bands, so that exact thing you were talking about can be showcased. It allows us to do those projects. Everything you're saying from experience is definitely correct and still very much in effect.
awesome.
Very
It's great
cool.
to hear.
Yeah, and even from my end, where before I graduated, I was given a 3-hour slot on Saturday nights to not only showcase the music I like, which is more heavier metal side, the Seton Hall side of things, for lack of better words, but me and my co-host actually crafted an entire storyline around it. So instead of just being a normal, like, hey, you're listening to, I'm blanking on metal bands, but instead of that, we've had this whole improv storyline where, hence where your comedy just floating comes from, where we just went into it each week with a theme of music and just riffed out these backstories for these two characters that hated each other, which is also where I first heard Shadow Academy, because you released White Whale like the second week of the show. And I'm like, we have to play this. It's amazing. And we've played, I believe, not all 3 of the singles, but we played White Whale, Invisible, and All for One, like every so often, because we did like new music at the end of each month. And it was just so refreshing to find stuff I wouldn't normally listen to within the genre I normally do.
That's
It's actually where Kyle's shirt comes from. His character, that's where his band is from.
Oh, sweet.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
Nice.
both the characters were kicked out of their bands and then formed up to do this radio show, and this was my characters.
That's funny.
Very cool. And I mean, that's a perfect example. That's the kind of thing that, you know, regular radio would never allow, like fun like that.
Right.
Yeah.
No fun.
And even
So weird.
in that same place, we had both of us had time on our student management team. I was actually programming and engineering at the same time. So especially because I know people in positions like that, you have to enjoy it first before you go into it, or else you might not enjoy it. So getting to do both of those and also being able to do projects like that, and also being a part of Kyle's project, that's exactly the energy that you guys touched upon.
Yeah, very cool. And thanks for playing the songs, by the way.
Yeah.
Oh,
Really
of
nice.
course.
Of
They're
course.
awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Oh man, rad.
Sonically beautiful is like a word I would use to, two words I would use to describe it.
Oh, thank you.
This gentleman over here is the one you can thank for that.
Dan, your voice is amazing too. Don't sell yourself short.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh man, we'll all high five later.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have time? We can make it down to Texas real quick.
Yeah, no worries. I think we've got like 5 minutes. So if you can get here, take the red eye.
Yeah.
Of course.
On the other hand, when it comes to the streaming services, they've become the new norm, and even with that, there's been a large revival of vinyl, which we actually do a 24-hour special of on our airwaves. Why do you think so many people are collecting and listening to vinyl when streaming services are easily available and way more convenient?
I mean, I can answer that. I think people, with the invention of streaming and kind of the normalcy and the normalization of it, I think people started realizing they missed experiential moments with music, and I'm one of them for sure. I love putting on a record, and I love that you have to kind of listen to it in order and you have to flip it over, and I like the tangible aspect of vinyl. And I think people are missing holding something, and I think it's as simple as that. At least that's what it is for me. I mean, if I need to get something quick, I'll pop it on, but as far as like a music lover, I just love the experience of it. And I think people are kind of hearkening back to real human experience, and I think that's what vinyl gives you.
Yeah, and it also has the big beautiful covers, and
Right.
You become so attached to your vinyl albums, because you spend hours with them,
and you have to pay for them, which I think there's a mental trade there, which is, well, I own this now, and you want to like spend time with it.
I made an investment.
You invested in it. And so when you can just, pay $9 a month and skip around, there's less of like a commitment, I think, in a sense to it.
Yeah. And also just the way it sounds, like the warmth of the sound, and even the pops and crackles, like there's something nice about that. And that is different than the digital cleanliness. Where, I mean, CDs are awesome too. Like I grew up with CDs, but they sound pretty similar to the way it would when you're streaming, it has that clean kind of thing. Whereas vinyl's its own thing for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you guys have a preferred method of music that you like to listen to music?
Not really.
Atmos.
Oh my God.
We Dan and I had an incredible experience in Nashville at a studio where they had an Atmos room, which is basically immersive. I don't know if you guys know about the Atmos format, but it's kind of an immersive sound experience, and you basically are sitting in the middle of a song. And that, I mean, it's not practical from a long-term perspective, but that's about as good as it got for me.
Yeah, it was pretty rad. You sit in the center of a room with like 12 really, really high-end speakers pointed at you from every direction in like a spherical kind of way, and the song just shoots at you with each speaker is a different instrument. That was remarkable. But in case you don't have $20 million lying around, which we didn't either, I think honestly just at home with headphones, I mean, it's really the simple stuff, like just hanging out with my wife and dog and just putting on an album and listening to it on good speakers is just, that's what life's all about,
Intentional listening.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Like
Absolutely.
not just having it on in the background and cleaning the house or whatever.
Which also, that's Michael McDonald time.
Yes. You love yacht rock.
Oh, heck yeah.
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 And just a few more questions to wrap up this interview. Are there any other future plans for Shadow Academy, or in your case, any of your other projects? I know you mentioned Starbomb earlier. Is there anything you could tell us about any of those? There's so many.
Well, shockingly, I think if all goes according to plan, I might be a part of 4 album releases within the next year.
I have so much respect for you, Dan.
Oh, thanks, man. It really wasn't intentional. So, some of them I've been working on for a long time, and they all happen to be bottlenecking at the same time. But last year, I did an acoustic cover album with the Super Guitar Bros a couple years ago. So we recorded a second one of those. That'll be the first one to come out, and then there's a new Sky Hell record, which is all recorded and finished. That's getting mixed at the moment. And then the new NSP record and the new Starbomb record are getting completed more or less at the same time. So yeah, hopefully they'll come out in the next year or so. You know, you want to let everything breathe and give everything its own kind of moment. But, you know, the most important thing is to feel that you got it right, you know, and nothing was rushed. So it just so happens that some of these took 3 years, some of them took a couple of months, but they all seem to have felt right at the same kind of time. But yeah, a lot of stuff on the way.
We've been picking at Shadow Academy ideas. I had Jack and Nate, who are guys that helped us.
We didn't even mention them. They're amazing.
Yeah, Jack and Nate Vanderpool are brothers that I produced their band a couple of years ago out of Phoenix called Viper Club, and I had never met 2 more talented musicians that weren't, you know, world-class studio session players. These guys are just like complete freaks of nature. And when I started working with them, I think Nate was like 18 and he played the drums like Dave Grohl. And I was like,
it's ridiculous.
What? Who are these kids? And so when we were making, you know, plans to make a Shadow Academy record, I was like, who could we bring in? The initial idea was like, every record, let's bring in new musicians to kind of play drums, like the instruments that I couldn't do justice to, like have those people come in. And it was like the first people I thought of was Jack and Nate. I was like, oh, they've got to come. Not only because they're insanely gifted musicians, but they're just the best people to hang out with. They've become dear friends of mine, and they're hilarious, and they just fit our world. And that's almost more important than the musician side. And so anyway, they came out to Nashville about 2 months ago to my house, and we just for like 4 days just started hacking out some new ideas. And then I've written a ton of new ideas, but we've just been busy with other things. And so it'll be a slow drip, but we'll get there, you know, again, as long as it takes to do it right. So
Right.
Yeah,
Of course, complete respect.
yeah, thank you.
thanks.
Where can people find you if they want to know more or are interested in listening to any project that you might have, including Shadow Academy?
Shadow Academy Music.com. Is that I think that's the
I
website.
think so.
Terrible at this stuff if you
Yeah.
haven't known.
We're not great at it.
We're on MySpace. And
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
Spotify
Yeah,
has it.
no, go to Spotify. That's probably the best place.
Right.
And then there's all the social media stuff. Just search it.
The
You'll find it.
usual places.
Yeah.
Right. All right. Well, thank you so much for both of you for taking the
you.
time to meet with us. A little longer than we usually do. Sorry about that.
All good, man.
No, it was really nice talking to you guys.
Yeah.
And like you can feel the passion you have for music. And that gives us energy. You know, that's inspiring for us to see.
Thank you very much.
Like Nate mentioned, we are both huge fans of not just Game Grumps, not just Shadow Academy, but everything you two have done collectively and on your own.
Thank you
Killer.
guys.
Take
And,
good care of yourselves.
Oh man, thank you.
That's rad.
Super nice.
Send us stuff when you guys do it. We'd love to hear it.
Oh, really? Okay. All right.
You too. Absolutely.
We're both working on music right now.
Yeah, Kyle,
Yeah.
you have an email address, so
Yes, sounds good. Well, I think that's it. Thank you so much for joining us.